morning. Good morning, first graders. Today we are going to talk about regards to the man in the moon. If you will remember, that's the story that we read yesterday. We were talking about Louis, whose father had a junkyard, and some of the students were making fun of Louis because Louis wanted to build a spaceship and go to the moon. And Louis's father said, "I will help you do that." We're going to review some vocabulary words from the story. Snickered, imagination, wondrous, jolted, and halt. Snickered is what the other kids were doing to Louis when he was talking about flying to the moon. They thought he was silly and they kind of made fun of him by laughing. Imagination. Now, imagination is something that I hope everybody has. We all use our imagination sometime or another. Like maybe John. John, what do you imagine?
Sometimes when we're playing basketball, I imagine like I'm LeBron James and I dunk it.
That is great. That's a wonderful way to use your imagination. And that brings us to the word wondrous. Wondrous sounds a lot like wonderful, and it actually means the same as wonderful. It's just a different variation of the word. Wondrous means wonderful and awesome. Jolted. Jolted is something that might happen if you are in a car accident and you're not wearing your seatbelt. Jolted is a very jerking motion. Actually, it's probably what happens if your seatbelt comes on. It kind of jolts you back. And halt. Halt is something that I saw Tammy do in the hallway today as we were moving to library earlier this morning, and the second graders were coming down the hall. She was the line leader, and she said, "Halt," because everybody needed to stop and let the second graders go by. Today, we are going to complete a graphic organizer that looks like an ice cream cone. We're going to talk about imagination and all the details from the story that Louie and Susie and Ruthie and Ziggy all used when they took their trip to the moon. Now, these are the flavors of the ice cream cone, and I want you to imagine how different flavors of an ice cream cone make you think, all the different flavors you would choose. If you could put 4 scoops on an ice cream cone, all the different flavors you would choose. And that is like the details in a story. Juicy things, the important parts of a story, okay? All these scoops of ice cream add flavor to our ice cream, and all the details in a story are what make our story interesting. So, we're going to write our topic on the bottom, and our topic would be imagination, because that's what's going on in this story. The kids actually are using their imagination, and they're going to fly to the moon, okay? So can you tell me one of the first things that happened in the story? John?
Louis and his dad were going to build a rocket ship out of stuff they had around their house.
Very good. They're going to start by building a rocket. Because you got to have something to get you to the moon, don't you? Okay, and then what happens next? Let's see. I'm trying to think. They build the rocket ship from some of the things that Louie's dad had around the house. Tammy, do you know what they did next?
I know. Susie, she wanted to go with Louie. They were going to go, and they were going to blast off and go to the moon.
Very good.
Or
She
space.
did. She wanted to go. So they were going to take their trip to the moon. Susie and Louie were headed to the moon. Very good. Now, I want you to think about what is something else in the story that is important. When we were using our imagination, after Susie decided she was going with Louie to the moon.
But they had to wait. They had to wait till the next day because it was too dark that night.
Yeah, okay, they did. They were waiting till the next day. So they blasted off the next day, didn't they? Louie and Susie blasted off. Can you think of anything that happened?
They got really scared. I would be scared. I think space is really scary.
Some other kids snuck along.
Oh yes, those other two kids that had kind of snickered at Louie earlier, didn't they? Who happened to show up in space?
Ruthie and Ziggy.
Ziggy, yeah, Ziggy.
Louie.
That's a funny name, Ziggy.
It is a funny name. It is a silly name. I remember a little cartoon character that there used to be called Ziggy. Louie and Susie blasted off, and while they were in space, they ran into Ruthie and Ziggy. What happened then? Can you tell me what happened next?
Didn't one of the spaceships broke down? Wasn't it?
Yeah, actually, it did. Very good. Ruthie and Ziggy were a little bit nervous, and they were kind of scared. So what did they do to Louie and Susie's rocket ship?
They tied a rope to it.
They did tie a rope to it, John. Very good. And what happened? What did they tell Louie and Susie? They said, oh, they were scared. Don't untie it. Don't untie it. Why?
Because they didn't know if they would ever get home again.
They didn't think they were going to get home again, did they? And what did Louie tell Ruthie and Ziggy that they needed to do?
They had to use their imagination.
They did have to use their imagination. Very good, Tammy. They said, use your imagination to get home. And what happened once they started using their imagination?
They started moving, but there was monsters there.
Oh, no.
They did. And those were actually, do you think those were real monsters that were flying at them?
It was kind of scary.
What were they doing?
They were using their imagination.
They were using their imagination because they probably weren't in a real rocket ship, were they? They weren't.
It looked like a bathtub.
It'd be kind of hard to build one overnight, wouldn't it? We know that those fancy astronauts in NASA spend a whole lot longer than one day building a rocket ship. But that's the beauty of being able to use your imagination. We can fly to space tonight if we want when we lay down to go to bed. All we have to do is use our imagination. John will probably lay down and dream about being LeBron James because he has been using his imagination. Tammy, use your imagination and tell me what you would be doing.
I wish it was, I would imagine it would be summer and I could be swimming at the pool.
Oh, yes.
I'm tired of being inside.
You are so right. That's a great way to use your imagination. Take us forward a couple of months to some warm weather so we can go swimming. We've had a long winter. Okay, boys and girls, I'm so proud of you. You did a wonderful job retelling this story for me. We reviewed our vocabulary words: snickered, imagination, wondrous, jolted, and halt. You told me some very important details about this story. Susie and Louie got into a rocket and they flew to the moon. And when they blasted off to the moon, they ran into Ruthie and Ziggy. And Ruthie and Ziggy were nervous and scared, but Susie and Louie told them, use your imagination. Just use your imagination and it will take you safely home. And sure enough, they used their imagination and their ship began to fly again, and they could untie themselves from Louie and Susie, and everybody made it safely home. It's very important to use your imagination.
The next day, everybody wanted to go with them.
Yes, you're right, John. That's a very good point. The next day, they came back. They told all their friends about their adventures, and everybody wanted to go. Very good. Okay, boys and girls, if you'll return to your seats, we're going to work on our graphic organizer, and I want to see what type of ideas you can come up with.